This video is a demonstration of using digital elevation models, topography data, in a watershed science context. The first step is to get the data set. I highly recommend the National Map Viewer basic version. It just seems to work smoother and easier, and it's clearer. There's the web address, viewer.nationalmap.gov/basic. And you can also get to this using a Google search and a bit of exploring through the sites. But perhaps the easiest way is to use the link and type it in directly. As with the case with many of these data downloads, the first step is to identify the study area. And there's a number of ways to do that, using coordinates or a particular point, or a bounding polygon, or naming an address place. I find that the easiest way, and getting started, often the easiest way is to just manually zoom and pan until you see the Study Creek, Long Pond, and Northrop Creek. So we'll proceed from there. So now I have a window that includes the creek itself. I recommend using an elevation product rather than raw data. There's a number of elevation products available, and they are differentiated generally. Well, some of them are. There's different ones. I'll start first with contours. It is possible to download a vector line data set of the actual contours, essentially lifted directly off of a standard topographic map. But we're after the raster DEM today. There's also data for Alaska only, and then there's also data sets with 4 possible resolutions. A 1 arcsecond DEM is about 30 meters cell size. The 1/3 arcsecond DEM is about 10 meters by 10 meters cell size, about 3 meters for each dimension of a cell, and 1 meter for each dimension of a cell. And the goal is generally to balance out the data set size, the quality of the data, and the availability of the data. So there's a balance there. We can show the availability of 1 second ArcDM, so that's very easily available. That's good. We can then look and see if there's available data for a 10 meter 1/3 arcsecond, and that's fine. We can also go ahead and check for an even finer detail data, about 3 meters, and we have no luck. And additionally, we have no luck for the 1 meter either. So the best resolution data that we have available is the 1/3 arcsecond. Now that was already the default selection, and it will usually be the most appropriate data set, it'll be the best available data, we'll go ahead to ask for fine products. And by luck and a good zoom, there's only one chunk, one glob of data, 1 degree by 1 degree. It's a fairly large chunk of data, but we only need one data set, and it's unambiguous which one it is. We can and then go ahead and download. It's about a 10 or 12 or 14 minute download, so I've already done that. Why don't we click on this and see what one of these data sets looks like. So I'll double click on it. It'll show me a handful of information here. With a raster data set, there's a very significant warning in that all of these files are necessary to properly use the data set. So there's a whole bunch of files. If you look in them, you'll see some very obscure file types, some really large. So there's a lot of obscure data types. This one is a bounding rectangle, and then we have some informational data. And I highly recommend that you do not try to subset or grab piece by piece. Just grab the whole bunch and say, by selecting with Control A, and then say Control Copy, and we will just dump this on the desktop for the moment. We'll call it, I will put it in my folder called stuff, and I will paste. And it's a very, very large data set. Might take a minute to to unpack and store to the data set. So it's several hundred megabytes. It's a very substantial data set. I do want to highlight the fact that that this data set does have several parts which have to be kept together, which can't be altered or moved around or separated, or else the thing won't work. So I just plopped a whole bunch of stuff into my class data folder, and now we can go ahead and see what this looks like by doing the add data operation. And we will try to go to the desktop, find stuff, and it is available here as a raster data set. As you can see, it has this little gridded kind of thing, and all of those files actually get presented in ArcMap as a single raster data set, and that would be it. We say add, and it'll take a while. We will go ahead and build pyramids. What this does is it creates an additional file which helps the load process proceed more quickly. So there's the data set, and we can see some of the rivers and the stream network and the drumlins and Lake Ontario, all one elevation, very flat, 282.15 meters. So there's our data set. What we would like to do next is to reduce this data set to the actual extent of our boundary. So at this point, we will go and load the boundary data set, and there's Northrop Creek once again. So what we can do now is use a very, you go to geoprocessing and search for tools, and use a very handy tool called extract by mask. And it's not the most obvious name, but it is the tool that does this job the most conveniently. So we can ask for extract by mask, which is a spatial analyst tool. So you have to make sure that your spatial analyst is turned on. That would be under customize, extensions, and I already do have it turned on, so it should have a check mark by it. Spatial analyst is checked under customize, extensions, turn on spatial analyst. I can go ahead and click on the tool, and what this does is it is a cookie cutter operation which is used for raster type data. So we have the input raster is the large DEM that we have loaded. The cookie cutter, the clip thing, is the watershed boundary, and for convenience, I'm going to let this go to a generic location, and I will momentarily save it. It's problematic with raster data specifying the location, so I'm going to show you the easier way to do that with less trouble. So I'll say OK. It might be an involved process to do all of this computation and selection. Should be done momentarily. And what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to use the export function on the new data set. So when this operation is complete, the new data set, good, green check mark. When this is complete, the new data set is going to have an obscure name, and it's going to, we can see now that there is the data set right there. It does have a, and you can see higher elevations to lower elevations. Seems to all be making sense. So what we're going to do now is we're going to right click on this and say data and export data, and I'm going to save this into my own personal location in stuff. So I'm going to save it as a geotiff. I'm going to use the default format here, and there's a lot of choices and a lot of different things going on here, by far the easiest thing to do is to save it as a geotiff, and it does find my own the location I've been using for previous examples. It did remember that, but I can specify something, ask for save, and say OK. And now I have another copy with a bad name, but that's, we will ignore that for a moment. That can be changed. So now I do have this data layer, and that's actually the harder part of this lab, the more confusing part. The easier part is to we are able to ask for the properties of this and the symbology, and we can actually ask for, by right-clicking here, turn off graphic view, we can ask for something called elevation 1 and say OK, and it gives us a very standard, and there's clearly a break in elevation right here, something interesting to explore. There's lowlands here and highlands here, and 2 breaks in elevation. Interesting topography. So now I have a nice color scheme for this, which is familiar because it's the color scheme used by National Geographic and other common map makers. I am also able to use a tool called, I'll search for tools again, and there it is, and it's called Hillshade, and it's in Spatial Analyst, and I can ask for the input raster to be the one that I have. I'm not going to save the Hillshade because I can recreate it very easily, so there's really no need to save it. I will use the default height and angle of the sun, and I would like to apply a exaggeration in the vertical direction to make this more viewable, and I'm going to let it go to the whatever location it wants. I'm not going to save the Hillshade. So there's the Hillshade, and that shows it's clear where the 2 ponds are in this. You can see, looks like there's some sort of a road or something that serves as a break in elevation. It is now possible to overlay. Now I can't see it anymore, so I can actually ask for properties and display and transparency. And I'm going to try 60% transparency, and that's not quite enough. I might want to go back to 40% transparency, or I mean that was too much, not enough to see. And there's a hill shaded, and I think actually when I write the lab up, revise the lab, I might ask for a 30 for an exaggeration, because this doesn't exaggerate quite as well as it could. But that's the that creates a hill shade. I could add another layer and turn the boundary back on as well, or I could add a stream layer, and I think that's the extent of the lab exercise for the week, a summary of it.